to separate the bodies. You wouldn't believe this.
The U.S. Central Command is urging Hamas to disarm quickly and stop shooting at innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza. President Trump has said he wasn't bothered that Hamas has killed some of whom he calls gang members. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
The federal government shutdown is more than 2 weeks old. The Senate holds another vote today on a spending measure that could end it, but the bill is expected to fail. President Trump's budget director, Russell Vought, says more than 10,000 federal workers could be laid off during the shutdown, but a federal judge in California has temporarily blocked more layoffs. As the shutdown wears on, food banks and other groups that serve military families are seeing a surge of new clients. From member station WHRO in Norfolk, Virginia, Steve Walsh has more.
Armed Services YMCA operates 22 food banks near military installations. They have seen a 30% jump in demand in the last couple of weeks. Pantries have had to close early for the day because they have run out of food, says Doreen Ocam with the group.
I mean, that's the reality of the fact, is there are more people than there is food today.
Groups that provide emergency loans to troops have also seen a surge. Even though troops did not miss a paycheck, anxiety over the possibility is forcing cutbacks. Dawn Cutler with the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society points out that many military spouses have also been furloughed, cutting household income. For NPR News, I'm Steve Walsh.
This is NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's now 9:04. St. Augustine's free park and ride shuttle is expanding for the Nights of Light season to include running Fridays through Sundays from November 15th to January 11th. The city of St. Augustine says the service also runs daily during the week between Christmas and New Year's. Pickup locations for the shuttles are at the St. Johns County Health Department on San Sebastian View, the Brody's lot on US 1 and West King Street, and the San Marco lot on San Marco Avenue. On the first night of the spectacle, shuttle service will include Anastasia Island. Shuttles operate from 1 to 11 p.m. More details are at citystaugt.com/lightupnight. A judge in Florida has temporarily blocked the planned transfer of land in downtown Miami for President Trump's future presidential library. The order was granted days after an activist sued the Miami-Dade College Board of Trustees for alleging a violation of the state's Sunshine Law. The lawsuit says the college did not provide enough notice for the September 23rd meeting when the school gifted the land to the state. A week later, Governor DeSantis and the rest of the Florida cabinet voted to transfer the land again to the Trump family for the president's future library. The land next to the historic Freedom Tower, which once served as a resource center for hundreds of thousands of Cubans seeking asylum in the U.S., is valued at more than $67 million. Clear skies and mostly dry conditions again today here in Northeast Florida. Temperatures will feel nice in the upper 70s to lower 80s.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include RBC Wealth Management, dedicated to providing financial strategies to help navigate wealth planning and legacy building. More at rbcwealthmanagement.com. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a freed man and the author whose reporting helped win his release from prison. We talked to the author and star of Bone Valley about their remarkable story of injustice and redemption. Later in the program, light, color, and a literal mountain of food. We tell you about the upcoming Hindu festival of Diwali. But first, it's a podcast whose signature review was, "It's not just good, it's infuriating." Bone Valley is, in the most basic sense, a story of a wrongful conviction, but the podcast and the book that followed are also devastating explorations of Florida's mangled justice system and the seeming impossibility of righting even obvious wrongs. Here to talk about it is Gilbert King, author of Bone Valley, as well as the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Devil in the Grove. Good morning, Gilbert.
Good morning, Ann. Thanks for having us.
We're also joined by Leo Schofield, who served 36 years in prison after being wrongfully convicted in the 1987 murder of his wife, Michelle. Leo, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Gilbert, the Bone Valley podcast has gotten enormous attention since you began releasing episodes in September 2022. It's been covered by the New York Times, The Guardian, 2020, and it's been downloaded over 10 million times at this point. So it might seem like everybody knows this story, but surprisingly, not everybody does know this story. Can you kind of just remind us of the broad outlines?
Yeah, sure. It's basically a story of a man who in 1988 is arrested and convicted of killing his wife, Michelle. And this was like 36 years ago. He spent 36 years in prison for this. And it is such an obvious case of an injustice where somebody else committed this crime. And the state absolutely knew this. They had forensic evidence linking another man to the crime and multiple confessions from this man. And yet the question is, why is Leo Schofield still in prison when the state knows this? And that became the question we really set out to answer. Why is Leo Schofield still serving time when this is so obvious?
I think that the overarching story of this podcast and then the book that followed is like everything in it is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
There is this, first of all, the way that you were initially tipped to the case, kind of unbelievable. A sitting judge comes to you and says, there's this innocent man in prison. You need to look into it.
Right. And I remember when I first got that card, I remember sitting down with some public defenders and showing them the card. And they're like, a judge gave you this? They're not supposed to give you this. Like this is basically saying that he's saying that a man was railroaded in the Florida prison system. And judges are not supposed to speak like that. And so there was definitely some ethical canons that were violated. But the public defenders, I passed it around the table. And the last one was from Polk County where this case took place. And he said, I know this case. You should call him. And that really was another indication, like there's something to look into here.
36 years in prison is an incredibly long time, Leo. I don't think anybody has to tell you that. You have now been out. You were paroled, officially free man. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And how has it been since your release?
Thank you for that. It's been amazing. Obviously, prison is really tough. I want to say, too, for the record, that I'm not free yet. I am working toward exoneration. I'm under parole. And so there's still another mountain to climb. But being out with my family, being out with my friends, and being able to live a little bit and maybe pursue a dream in music and in writing has been really incredible. So,
one of the things that is unbelievable about this case, Gilbert, is that, Leo was not exonerated, despite the fact that there was all of this evidence, as you say, confessions, fingerprints of another man, a serial killer, as it happens. But part of what's unbelievable about this podcast is that you solved this case and two other crimes, essentially, committed by this same person. I mean, you basically helped officials, find the perpetrator in two cold cases.
Right. I mean, that's the remarkable thing about it is like in this story, basically it's the story of two men connected to the murder of Michelle Schofield. One man insists he's innocent. He's been saying this for 4 decades. And the other man is saying, I did this. I'm guilty. I can tell you facts that nobody else would know except the killer. And the state of Florida doesn't believe either man. And that became this conundrum of what I really set out to do. Fortunately, I was very lucky in that after I interviewed Jeremy Scott a few years ago, we maintained a relationship and we kept talking. And he would sometimes write me and call me any times of the day and just say, I remembered something else about a detail about this other man that I killed that I didn't tell you before. And he would tell me these things. He was definitely trying to come clean. He was being tortured by the trauma of his own actions. And he said it was like a nightmare. I'd go to bed at night seeing the faces of the people I killed. And it's my punishment, he said. And it was very sincere. And over those 4 years that I was talking to him, he never recanted or never backed out from those. In fact, he was really trying to help me solve some of the other crimes he'd gotten away with.
Leo, obviously you're not incarcerated anymore, but as you said, you still have not been exonerated. And that is the next, hill to climb. In terms of this, extensive, long process, I mean, not only 36 years behind bars, but you were convicted of first-degree murder. You were given a life sentence. You exhausted all of your appeals. And, then Gabriel approaches you. And this process with him has been years long. Just even before the podcast was released, it was 4 or 5 years. How have you sort of managed to just process that time and to maintain what is a really remarkable continued optimism?
Right. And thank you for that question. I want to say this for the record, too, that it wasn't always this way. I went into prison very angry because of what happened. And I spent a good 10 years in there, having a lot of dark days. And at some point, I had to make a decision who I'm going to be from here. I'm remembering a shadow of who I wanted to be before prison, with now who is actually limited because of prison, but still, I didn't want prison to change who I am. And at 10 years in, I had to let the anger go, because in prison, anger can get you into some really trouble. And so I actually decided, and it was a conscious decision to make. I had two paths to go down, and I just refused to let prison change who I was in character. My mom told me something the day that I was taken away from her in handcuffs. And we were on the sidewalk, and I'll never forget this. We were in Logan, Boston, getting ready to go to Logan Airport, and they let her hug me. I couldn't hug her back, and because I was handcuffed, and I was just a young kid, 22 years old. She said, "I want my same son back." I want to say something about that real quick. The mom doesn't want a son back who's an idiot. So that in itself is, and mom knows, right? And so that always stayed with me. And there was a point in time where I thought about that so often, and there was no way to bring the same boy back. But I decided I'm going to bring back something better. And so I made that decision. And if you make that kind of decision in prison, there's a way in prison. The DOC provides for you to do right. It's not just a hell-bent on, violence and things like that. You can get into education. You can get into vocational training. You can go to college. I've got 4 college degrees. And I went to school. And I tried to stay up with the times as much as possible. Then I got out, and they gave me a cell phone. I realized how far back I was, which was very far back. But I did. It worked out. Education worked out for me. My faith worked out for me. Having family and friends worked out for me, and that's how I got through it.
You also led a prison ministry, and I understand that as difficult as it was to get to the point where you were going to be paroled, which took forever, and 4 failed attempts at parole, but you even had a little bit of difficulty making that move because of the people that you were ministering to in prison, and because
Absolutely.
of the way that the system works. Once you're gone, you're not allowed to be contacting them anymore as a former inmate.
Right. Well, that's changed a little bit for me because of the program I went through. The Corrections Transition Program does allow for us to have contact with some of the inmates that we've left behind and that are in the program, to go back and encourage them. I met with Secretary of Department of Corrections yesterday, Ricky Dixon, who's a remarkable man. I think he's going to help me get back in as well. And you're right about that, and especially at Hardy Correctional Institution, where I did 20 years of my time. You can't do 20 years anywhere and have the relationships that I built, with the kind of person that I am, both inmate and staff alike. They're some of my best friends. I honestly did not want to leave Hardy at all. To go to my out program, I did not want to go. And so many people were sorry to see me go. And part of it was the life that I built there. I was the pastor of the largest Messianic Christian community in the state prison system. I had been that for 12 years, helped many men find God, get their life on track, and go home and not come back. So there was a great purpose there, and I had great respect there. And then I come out here, I got to get a job in a mechanic shop. And, I'm kind of lost in space, and 9 months in, I have a near-fatal motorcycle accident with my daughter, and the whole world's upended. And so, it's been a little bit of a struggle.
Yeah.
Just a tiny bit.
And I'm glad to see that you are walking again. I know you were in a wheelchair for some time after that motorcycle accident. I'm glad to see that you're, in one piece. It sounds like your healing is going pretty well. But a road to go still, because you're a musician, and that's
Right.
been one of your healing, go-to places, is the fact that you're a guitarist, and that's been since you were a young man.
Yeah, and it's funny because in prison, I didn't have any instrument. We bought stuff as we could from our families that donated, and you don't always buy the most expensive stuff. But I got home, and I've got this need to have guitars, so I think I've got 9 guitars now. I just bought another one a couple of days ago, one I've always wanted my whole entire life. It's a Gibson Les Paul, and yeah.
Wow, nice guitar.
And I played it. I played the electric guitar for the first time since January 20, since the accident, because I couldn't play. I had both wrists operated on, and Gilbert was at the house, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna try to play the electric guitar for the first time, and I did. Slowly but surely, we're getting back into playing ability.
Gilbert, I want to talk to you about getting involved in a podcast project. But before we do, I want to start with a soundbite from your partner in this investigation, Kelsey Decker, who was, at the time you brought her on as a research assistant, she was like a college student. This was really new to both of you. This was the first podcast that you did. And, as somebody that does narrative nonfiction, podcasting was new to you. Finding your voice was sort of a difficult process. And Kelsey really was an important part of that. She helped tell the story. She helped investigate the story, but she also provided a really sort of human aspect to the storytelling. So if we can, let's take a listen. This was after Kelsey and you were both shown evidence in the case for the first time, and that included seeing crime scene photos and autopsy photos of Michelle. So let's just take a listen to her reaction.
I mean, I was thinking about her and the pain she must have felt and how scared she must have been in those last moments. There was also the proximity and age. I was thinking about, also myself and all of my friends who are young women and could potentially be in a situation like that.
So let's talk about that. I mean, it's obviously an incredibly emotional moment for Kelsey. Talk about including that sound, how you decided to incorporate some of your own feelings as reporters, investigators in this story.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things to put that into context is Kelsey and I were down there, and we were expecting a podcast team to join us, and we didn't know anything about that, the production side, recording, and there were delays, corporate delays, and we said, well, we're down here, we better start doing this on our own. And we had a couple trial runs where I didn't know what my voice was, and Kelsey would say, you sound like a newscaster, just talk normally, and I was like, well, you got to direct me. We didn't know what we were doing. And we finally decided just leave it on all the time, and at least it'll be real. Just don't be performative. Just don't say it. Just react. And we got used to just doing that. And after this, seeing the evidence from the evidence room and seeing those really gruesome photographs, we were going out to the car to debrief. And Kelsey held it together. We saw some horrific photographs of violence, and then we get to the car, and she just lost it, and she just needed to regroup. And, we just had the thing running as we always do because we debrief like that. And, I remember getting back into the studio, and when the producers finally found it, they said, we want to use this tape of Kelsey reacting. And my initial instinct was like, no, this feels like kind of manipulative. I don't know if we should just, have the actual people investigating crying. Like, I'm not sure how I feel about that. It doesn't seem like journalistic. I wasn't really sure, but my producers were really much more experienced in audio storytelling. And they said, this says more than any words would say in a moment. Instead of trying to write around this and try to describe what we saw, just let it play out like that in a real way. And that totally won me over. But, there was just that kind of moment. This case, it went on for years, and it was that emotional to us. Even visiting with Leo in prison, we would come out of there, just him describing the anguish of searching for Michelle and us already knowing that she's already dead at this point. But he doesn't know it, and he's describing these stories. And there was a lot of moments like that were just really gripping for us and really, I think, changed all of us by reporting on this, like the human side of this. So it was difficult to really decide what to keep in, but we really trusted our producers to say, this is really speaking in a way that you guys can't.
Leo, can you talk a little bit about the role that Kelsey played for you in this process?
Yes, thank you. Even while you were playing that, I got really emotional about that because I'm sitting here remembering the first time I heard that and realizing that Kelsey's looking at some stuff I can't. Those photos I've never seen. I just didn't want to see those. I didn't want those to be burned into my memory, of who my wife was. And here Kelsey had to look at those for my benefit in researching this case. And that was one of the defining moments for me in my relationship with Kelsey. Later, I would do a couple interviews with her during the pandemic with just her and I. And, as she mentioned, she wasn't much older than Michelle. And so she was very much relating to that, and I was as well. And so when I'm telling this story to her, the parts that she was interviewing me for, her faith and belief in me meant everything. First, because she's a girl, and, she's not going to let some guy just tell her some story and believe it. So she brought a lot of validation to the story for me, and we connected like that. And so Kelsey will always be very special to me in this story.
One of the things that was kind of unbelievable about this story was just the resistance that the state had to revisiting the case. And, there was a request for a new trial that was denied. Then there was an appeal of that decision, which was denied. And so, the judicial system, the process failed, but the people who were the investigators and the prosecutors in the case were adamant that this was, an appropriate conviction, that they had the right guy, and they just were not really interested in this other suspect. They said that Jeremy was not reliable in his confession, that it was a false confession, and they also really faulted, and it became a big issue for Leo at the parole hearings about the fact that he wasn't showing any remorse, and that was part of the reason that he was denied parole so many times. We have a bite from the podcast where Kelsey is talking to Jeremy Hill, one of the prosecutors in the office that handled the case and who spoke at the parole hearing in, I think, 2000. Let's just take a listen to what he had to say.
I listened to that presentation and how this individual has taken advantage of a lot of opportunities. But folks, I got to point out an absolute glaring hole in that presentation. I didn't hear one word about regret, sorrow, wish I hadn't done it. I was a different person then. This guy is an unrepentant, jury convicted, first-degree murderer, proven beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. There's no remorse, there's no sorrow. How do you put a man in a program, getting him ready to be released into society, when he can't say, I'm sorry? When he can't say, I did it? I know this is a subsequent, and I'm sorry I'm so emotional about it. I just feel very strongly that this is a cold, calculating, first-degree murderer. He's a manipulator, and he's exactly where he ought to be.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't there for that one. Kelsey went and did that one by herself, and I remember listening to the tape, and I remembered something that Leo had said to me once, and it really spoke a lot about who Leo was. He said the denial of parole was less important to him than it was for all his family members and supporters to be in that room and to hear a man just besmirching his character and just calling him a murderer. And, I remember thinking at the time, well, he's a prosecutor and he won his conviction. Of course he's going to say that kind of thing. But Leo was just like traumatized by that because he knows it's not true. And to hear an official from the state saying that about him was really triggering. And when he told me that, I had to sort of grasp and sit with that for a moment to realize what he was saying. Like, there's a man up there lying about me being a murderer, and that bothers me, and it bothered him more than the denial of parole. I just found that's really kind of shocking in a way, and it made me think about like the commitment to this concept of finality, and just like, well, a jury has spoken, the courts have spoken, and it made me think, we've had 3,500 plus exonerations in this country over the years, and all of them share the same thing in common. A jury has spoken, and the appellate courts have spoken, and yet we did get it wrong. It does get wrong sometimes, and it still surprises me that in the face of this much overwhelming evidence pointing to another man's guilt in this story, that they doubled down so hard and tried to stick to this narrative.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to author and podcaster Gilbert King, along with Leo Schofield, the wrongfully convicted man, who's the focus of both the book and the podcast Bone Valley. If you have questions or comments about the case, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. Leo, I can only imagine how frustrating it is to be asked to apologize for something that you didn't do, and then have that actually be a prerequisite for your release.
Right. And I was listening to Jerry Hill there, and I remember that well. And when he was saying that, I wanted to scream, I'm innocent. I cannot show remorse or sorrow, whatever that is. And I'm not going to. I cannot. There's just no way to do that. And it was very frustrating because I personally believe that Jerry Hill is a very smart man. I've come to believe that he is a man in leadership that trusted the people who worked under him. He wasn't the actual prosecutor. I was a leader in the prison. I had people under me that did things that I entrusted them to do, and if I had to micromanage everything they do, it would be useless. So my thinking is, and I've learned this just because of certain misstatements that have been made on his part, that he didn't know the case really well. I think he really trusted John Aguero to do what his job was, to prosecute the case. And he believed in John Aguero. He was friends with John Aguero. He mentored John Aguero. And he believed that John got it right. Unfortunately, John did not get it right. And I am an innocent man, regardless of the statements that they make. And I think that at some point, this is just my hope. It's me. My lawyer's going to hate me for saying this, but I hope that one day Jerry Hill and I can sit down at a table and talk. I do believe the man is a good man. I tricked him into shaking my hand one day, and he did. He couldn't pull me out of a lineup. That was instructive to me. But when he found out who I was, he didn't bat an eye at it, and he asked me how I was doing. And that gave me pause to think maybe this guy doesn't know the whole story. I mean, I'm not trying to make him sound ignorant. I'm making him sound he's a leader. His job wasn't to know every fact of the case. Right, he was the elected state attorney. His job was to supervise assistant state attorneys.
Yeah,
and so I'm hoping for that. We'll see. The jury's still out on that question, but I'm out now. So
John Aguero was the original prosecutor on this case, and actually a man who picked you up to bring you to prison wearing a electric chair tie clip.
God.
He was the head of homicide at the time in that circuit, and he has now died, as has your original attorney. And one of the crazy complexities of this case, Gilbert, is that you kept finding these overlapping connections that were just so strange. The fact that the perpetrator in this case, Jeremy, was also involved in these other cases, sometimes involving defendants who were themselves wrongfully accused of crimes with the same attorney that Leo had. It just must have been really bananas to
we're
kind of
connecting the dots now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it, and the same prosecutors, the same problematic cases with bad evidence. I mean, it must have really felt like you were untangling just a nest of craziness.
Yeah, it really did, especially with the Jack Edmond connection, because Leo's been told as soon as he's arrested in the jail, he's like, you can't trust your life in a capital case to a public pretender. They called him, like they're overworked. You got to get a private attorney, and Jack Edmond is the man. He's the best attorney in Polk County, and he had a very successful career, I think, especially in the '60s and '70s. But as he started getting older, I think, the way science had changed in some of the trials, and he just wasn't really on his game. And that style of lawyering didn't really work as well anymore. And he just got completely overwhelmed by a very aggressive and effective prosecutor in John Aguero. And, it was a circumstantial case. That was not really Jack Edmonds' forte, but it was John Aguero's forte. And he just overwhelmed him. And, Jack Edmond was this guy who shows up at the jail to see Leo the night before the trial. It's the first time he meets him. And it's basically like, let's talk about your case. What's this whole thing about? It's like a capital murder case with his life on the line. And, he missed so much of the evidence. There's so many like police reports. Had he seen, he could have made a much more effective defense. The most obvious thing was there were fingerprints in the car that Michelle were driving that didn't match Leo, Michelle, or, Leo's father, nobody. And they were just seen as strangers' fingerprints. And Jack Edmond had no idea that they existed. And so he couldn't challenge that. And, had they been able to challenge that at the time, they would have found out that it came back to an extraordinarily violent young man who'd already beaten one murder charge and had lived in the area about a mile away from where Michelle's body was found, who later on confessed, obviously. So it was right there in front of him. I could understand why maybe the police didn't go in that direction, but Jack Edmond could have. And that cost Leo his life, basically.
One of the things that Jack Edmond allowed and did not prevent in the case was a very deep dive into domestic violence, a history, claims against Leo. It was not a perfect relationship. There was a lot of tumult in it, but there are rules of evidence that prevent people from just getting on the stand and kind of person after person after person. I think there was more than 20 people that kicked off this trial testifying about Leo. And because his attorney didn't object to any of that on the later appeals, that was not something that could be used by his more qualified attorneys to say, hey, this wasn't a fair trial. You're not allowed to just do this to assault somebody's reputation, even if there was a history there.
Right. And I think that was one of the most damaging parts of the trial because, it was two straight days of people parading up there talking about he's got a temper. And it was just these constant stories. And, at some point, really, I think the judge should have stepped in and just said, this is really prejudicial, right? This is 2 straight days of this kind of argument. There's no evidence connecting Leo to the crime. We're just talking about his character. And, I think Leo can talk about this stuff from a legal perspective, the 404 bad character evidence that never should have been let in. But Leo's attorney let that slide. He later on and said in an appellate, he didn't understand the rules of evidence that well.
Yeah. And this attorney, obviously didn't protect you from that. But in your years in prison, you learned a lot about the law, what is and is not allowed. The issue of domestic violence was something that the podcast didn't shy away from. Can you talk a little bit about that part of your history with Michelle and how it was, how you kind of came to the understanding that that was going to be part of this story as it was told?
Right. Well, it begins with my first meeting with Gilbert because he came in to interview me, and I told him right from the beginning, I want you to dig as deep as you can dig. I'm going to be as transparent as Scotch tape. Nothing is off the table. And the reason why I did that is because I was not afraid of what he would find. I'm never afraid of what anybody will find if they do the deep dive. And just a real quick sidebar to that, Gilbert is finding out now some of those same people who testified against me are now coming back and saying, hey, I didn't mean to say that. I was lied to. And, they're retracting their statements. And be that as it may, it was not a perfect relationship as well. Well, it was perfect for me. My love for Michelle and her love for me was perfect. We didn't have a happy moment every single moment of our relationship. What never gets told is how happy we really were, to be together. I mean, I just met her not a year before this, longer than a year. I was with her a year, and it was one of the happiest years of my life. I was 21 years old. So, at 21, I think I thought I knew everything. And when things didn't go the way that I thought they should, I could be an idiot. I can still be an idiot, to be honest with you. And so, yeah, that played a part in the relationship, but it gets blown up when people seem to jumped on a bandwagon that I didn't even know existed. And it was really hard because some of these were really close friends to me. One in particular got on a stand and absolutely told a bold-faced lie about something that he did to his girlfriend. And he and I knew, we both knew, he just told something that we both knew he was lying about. And it was really hard to sit there because I'm the one that's like an idiot sitting there sucking lifesavers from my attorney who I just met. And I can't say anything about that. I can't challenge him. I can't correct it. I can't stand up and say he's a liar. And in this situation, anytime you're in that posture, you're the one that's guilty because you're the one that's accused. But just because you're accused doesn't mean that you're guilty, and just because somebody else takes a stand and tells a story about something doesn't always mean it's true.
Well, in terms of the reliability of, testimony in this case, I mean, you dig so deeply into this, Gilbert, and you find all kinds of problems with what was presented as evidence, problems with the testimony as it was presented. But in all of these, investigations that you and Kelsey were doing in and around this case, you also found cases where detectives were threatening women, particularly, with taking away their children, seeing that their kids would be put in foster care or into child protective services. I bring that up only because, we recently had a death penalty case here that was up for a rehearing, and the same allegation surfaced that people had been threatened with having their children taken by law enforcement. These are very vulnerable people sometimes.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we were finding. A lot of times we'd go and meet these people, and like especially these young women. At the time they're like 14, 15 years old. They're having their second child, and an authority man comes in. And obviously when you're dealing with this kind of poverty in these kind of areas, there's a lot of broken families and single mothers, and they're vulnerable. And to hear that your children are going to be taken away, this was a threat that was used. It was weaponized against them, and they were made to lie. And some of them had to lie. They just felt like they had to. Others didn't. Others stood up to it. And we were finding this a lot. Going back into Leo's case. I saw that the prosecutor was actually manipulating the evidence of his star witnesses, his star material witnesses like Alice Scott, and using her testimony and some others to tie these pieces together that really didn't exist 15 months ago. Before that, I don't think the police had a case. They knew this case was falling apart. It was going cold. Prosecutor comes in, brings these witnesses into his office with no witnesses, no tape recorders, and starts putting together the tape. And now the timeline's starting to change a little more favorably. And I thought to myself when I was going through this, I'm like, all right, this is the same guy who's taking his key star witnesses and manipulating them. It made me go back and look at that domestic violence a little differently. And when I started reporting on some of that stuff, I was finding out that it wasn't quite the way Aguero was saying. He was really twisting and using a lot of innuendo. And this sort of runs throughout. I think, you have people who are, on the margins of society. They're vulnerable. Many of them have charges that they're facing. And so, a state attorney, you're doing them a favor a little bit, maybe something can be worked out. And we were seeing a lot of that kind of stuff.
When you went back to you and Kelsey and tried to just interrogate the timeline that the state presented, it really required this unbelievable acceptance of just an incredible, it would have been like somebody kills someone and within 15 minutes has inveigled his parents to participate in a cover-up, to hide a body, to lie to police. I mean, if the timeline that prosecutors had presented had happened, it would have it defies reason.
Right. And I also think about this, according to the state's theory, within minutes of killing his wife, stabbing her 26 times, he's supposed to go straight to the father's house and walk around his living room saying, I can't find my wife. Like the interesting thing about when you look at Leo's behavior, while his wife is missing before the alleged time of the murder, which he knows nothing about anyway, but his behavior doesn't change for 3 days. There's no let up. There's no like adrenaline drop. Like I just stabbed somebody 26 times. Maybe I don't want to be out searching anymore. I mean, if you look at some of these cases that we see in the news where husbands initially report their wives missing and then we find out that they did it, their behavior definitely changes. They're trying to mislead the police. You can see it. His behavior was consistent for days until the body was found. And even after the body was found, he was still working with the police and trying to solve this. Didn't ask for a lawyer. He's out there actually trying to help them solve the crime. And that was really telling to me because that's behavior that's, you can track it.
I mentioned that there's so many unbelievable aspects to this case, and one of them really is this theme of forgiveness. The fact that Leo, you've openly and, in fact, directly forgiven the man who did kill your wife, Jeremy. And in fact, after your or your motorcycle accident, you had an opportunity to speak to him from the hospital. Let's take a listen to that conversation, just a brief bit of it.
Jeremy, I want to tell you something, and this is coming from a long time of prayer and just a lot of thought. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to thank you for telling the truth. I want you to know that I forgive you with all my heart.
So there has been some news about Jeremy in just the past couple weeks.
Right. Unfortunately, Jeremy died. We learned that. Gilbert told me that a couple of weeks ago. And we had an opportunity to meet with his family, who, as a result of this podcast and the revelations that have come out, his family have accepted that Jeremy actually did, in fact, kill my wife. And they were very sorrowful for that. He has a son. I don't know if I should mention his name or anything, but
Justin.
Justin, okay, good. I want to make sure, because Justin is a very sweet individual, a very special kind of human being. At 35 years old, he is the polar opposite of his dad, but he is also an image of his dad and what I think his dad could have been. And it was months ago he revealed to Gilbert that he felt like he didn't belong here. Like if his dad would have been caught for the murder of my wife, he wouldn't have been conceived. And so I really felt bad about that. And forgiveness was not about Jeremy, by the way. It was about me. It was about letting go of that anger. And because that was another fork in my road. I could have went down differently. And again, it's about who I wanted to be in my life. At that point in time, I was already a pastor. And I decided that the example I wanted to set for my men was one of true forgiveness, and you don't get a greater test than that. And so that phone call was the first test. This next test that you're talking about here was that the family had asked me to come and speak at his funeral. And so we did. We went and spoke at his funeral, and we eulogized Jeremy, and it was a really special moment for us. Yeah, and here's what's great. So I get there, and we walk in, and Justin comes up and hugs me. He's in tears, and he says, "I don't belong here. I'm so sorry. I don't belong here." And I had to grab him by his shoulders, and he wouldn't look at me directly. And I said, "Jeremy, look at me. My God doesn't make mistakes. You were conceived for this moment right here so that we could be together and walk this very event right here. And so together we're gonna do this together." And I said, "I don't want to hear you say that again." And I made him look at me again. I said, "Look at me. I don't want to hear you say that again. You belong here, and I am so glad I got to meet you." And so we did that, and then we did the service. And afterward, he had asked us to give him a few minutes to be with his dad, and of course we did. And then when we got back together, I told him that his dad would be so proud of him, and he said, "Well, now you can be my dad." And I thought, man, that's pretty special. I said, "I'd be honored to be your dad." And I want to say this too, Ann, if I can. I can't forgive Jeremy for anybody else. I have two brother-in-laws who are still living, who have their own feelings about all this stuff, and they have a right to their feelings. I don't challenge those at all. One of them I'm really close to and I love with all my heart, and he would not have that same sentiment probably. But I forgave Jeremy because of me and where I was and what I had to do and how I had to live it. And so I totally understand if someone else says, that's not going to work for me. That's fine. I'm not trying to get anybody else to do the same. I forgave Jeremy for me.
Yeah.
Beyond the podcast, Gilbert, there were a number of follow-ups. Obviously, the story, it began as recordings, but then it kind of became a live thing that was happening, these constant updates. And then you've gone on to tell more about Jeremy's story. You've gone on to tell more about Kevin Herrick, who is Leo's former cellmate and who now is, Leo and you are working on exonerating because of his wrongful conviction. This is not a story that is isolated. And in fact, we have a message from one of our listeners, Ricardo, saying Devil in the Grove should be mandatory reading in Florida schools. A truly gripping book, a tough topic, but so needed today. I loved it. Thank you. That obviously is the book that you won the Pulitzer for, and that is, an older case. But you also it led to the exoneration of the Groveland Four, which were four young black men who were wrongfully convicted, and who were exonerated by the current governor, who, after many, many years, and your book.
Right, and that was really, to me, it's like the power of storytelling. When all their legal avenues are shut, which they were for the Groveland Boys and they are for Leo, what's the last resort? It's telling a story. And sometimes I think, well, a story shouldn't have that kind of impact. This should be the court's responsibility to get these things right. But sometimes it does take a story. And, that was really one of the reasons I really wanted to write this book, was because there was so much more to the story that just it kept evolving. People came out of the woodwork to talk to me about things. And I just really began to recognize that, it's for the integrity of the judicial system. We have to correct these past injustices. And Leo's case is such an example of that. To me, this is one of the most galling and obvious wrongful convictions I've ever seen. I mean, it's hand delivered to you. You have a man who's forensically connected to the crime scene, who's confessed in detail to this. I had a 4-year relationship with this man where we talked about these things. He's never wavered from that. He's just as perplexed that Leo's still serving time for this, that he would say that to me, like, how's Leo's parole? Does he have a chance? I wish I could help him more. And he even said to me at one point, I wish I could someday sit down with Leo and tell him I'm sorry for what I did, not just to Michelle, but to him. And all the remorse that the state was expecting to see from Leo, it was all from Jeremy. And the only empathy for Jeremy in the entire story was from Leo. It's just a shocking story.
We've got just about 30 seconds left, Leo, but I know that, you are working for your own, eventual clearance from this in name and, your cellmate's freedom.
Right, Kevin Herrick. You can find his case at kevinherrickisnext.com. He too is innocent, 30-year friendship or more. And I believe we're going to get it. And it's people like you and this kind of media that helps us get it. So thank you for that.
Well, I know you guys are touring the state, a couple of local appearances, and then you're going to end up at the book fair in Miami that is open to the public. It's so great to meet you both. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Gilbert King, Leo Schofield, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us, Ann. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll be back in just a minute.
Get ready for a magical family movie night at WJCT Studios. On Tuesday, October 29th, we're screening the Halloween favorite, Hocus Pocus. Doors open at 6:30, films at 7. Join us for a night full of spells, laughs, and the unforgettable Sanderson sisters. We'll have popcorn and concessions to keep you fueled for the night. Tickets at wjct.org/film. This Halloween classic is pure magic.
On the next Fresh Air, Julian Brave Noisecat, the son of an Indigenous Canadian father and white mother. He co-directed a documentary about abuse at missionary boarding schools Native children were required to attend. His father was thrown away in one school's incinerator room minutes after being born, then rescued by a night watchman. Noisecat has a new memoir. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
President Trump says lower drug prices for Americans are coming.
The United States is done subsidizing the health care of the rest of the world. It's a big thing. I can't tell you how big this is.
Discounted prices will be offered at Trump RX, a new direct-to-consumer website launching next year. And it's part of a deal Trump cut with some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. So who really benefits? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9. The Trump administration has decimated the Department of Education with staffing cuts. The latest round of layoffs all but wipes out the Office of Special Education programs. So what does this mean for the millions of kids who receive services from these programs? How the Education Department cuts will affect children with disabilities. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Light, color, and a literal mountain of food. We're going to preview the Diwali Festival. It's an annual festival at the Hindu temple here in Jacksonville. And we are joined by Shivani Kanji, who is a volunteer with the temple, who's here to tell us about it. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here. So for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about Diwali, what the holiday is, what it represents, and why people should be interested in checking it out.
Yeah, so Diwali is the Festival of Lights. It's celebrated by so many people around the world, Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists. So it's very colorful, very vibrant, celebrating good over evil. There's a lot of traditions, bonding, and a lot of fun overall.
Yeah, and light is a big part of it. It's like, as you said, good over evil, but also kind of light in darkness. And so it's a very visual event too, with kind of a lot of lights and candles.
Absolutely. So everybody celebrates at home as well. So they'll clean their houses, they'll decorate, they'll put lights up everywhere. There's a lot of art. So what we call traditional rangoli. So that's sand art, colored sand. They'll do art on the walkways around their house with that and just kind of brighten up the place. And of course, putting out the oil lamps everywhere. So there's a lot of color and light involved. And then even at the mandir, at the temple, we do also do the rangoli there as well. And there'll be lots of lights, lots of colorful outfits
Yeah.
you'll see as well, and lots of food.
Yeah, let's talk about the food. So it's called an ankut. It's described as an actual mountain of food. I mean, it really is literally that. Describe what the tradition is, what it looks like, what's on offer.
Yeah, so Ankut, like you said, literally means mountain of food. Un means food. Kut means mountain. So we do celebrate one of the days at the temple. Everybody brings in a lot of vegetarian delicacies, lots of sweets. So Diwali is a time of eating lots of sweets food, lots of also savory foods as well. So you'll see kind of a variety there. So you'll see in Jacksonville, we have quite a few offerings. I think last year we had over 800 different food items there. So literally a mountain of food that everybody gets to enjoy together at the end of the day, kind of come together and just celebrate the season with all the food.
And it's like an offering initially, but then it's something that is enjoyed by the people that are in attendance. And this is an event that really is open to the public.
Absolutely. Anyone is welcome. And it's really just about that joy and gratitude. Hence, we do the offering of food as well. But then also just that gratitude of being together. And it's all about the unity as well. So, unity starts at home. So having that family bond. So doing all of the Diwali activities at home as well. But then coming together with your community at the mandir as well. And being able to celebrate with the entire community is a big part of that as well. And it's open to everybody.
And the event itself is at the temple. There are a few events over a few days, and I think some of those might be more aimed at people who kind of regularly go to the temple. But the event that is most public, this Diwali Festival of Lights, is the 22nd of October. Is that right?
Yeah, Wednesday the 22nd is when we have our Ankut, and there are different, spiritual activities, prayers throughout the week as well. People will mostly also do that at home. So Wednesday all day will be the Ankut celebrations where everybody can come in. Usually around 12 o'clock is when that kicks off, and through about 7 o'clock. So you'll see people coming in after work a lot more, but you can kind of meet and greet everybody and enjoy some food and enjoy the decorations and just kind of revel in that unity together.
Yeah, I mean, how did you decide upon the theme of unity? What's the thinking behind that?
So that was actually inspired by our spiritual leader, Mahant Sai Maharaj. And it's just with the thought that, like I mentioned, unity begins at home, right? But when we bring that to the community, we bring unity to the community to the world, the community shines brighter. And together, we can't do anything without that unity. So starting that off at home and bringing that to the larger community is a big vision of Mahensai Maharaj.
And this is typically a large event. What is the size of the population? What is the size of the temple's usual attendance?
So usually, it depends on the week, but during Angkut, we get over 1,000 people typically throughout the day, kind of coming in at different times.
Yeah, and it's a free event.
Yes, absolutely free.
And you brought us some sweets today, so we're going to get a little initial sense of what might be on offer. But again, it's October 22nd. It's from noon to 7. It's at the Hindu Temple on Merrill Road, and we've got a link on our website if people are interested in finding out more.
Yeah, absolutely. And there'll be tons of different food stalls that you can try different Indian street food as well.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, Shivani Kanji, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have if you have comments or questions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything today, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight or find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. First Coast Connect is produced by Stacey Bennett. Our associate producer is Isabella Casapow. Our show is directed by Brady Coram, and our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas. Join us tomorrow when our panel of journalists discusses the week's biggest headlines on our Friday Weekend Review. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Congaree & Pen, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine,